You are very welcome to another webinar produced by the Ancient Order of Hibernians in America. We're the largest and oldest Irish organization in the United States with members in all 50 states. Earlier this week, Prime Minister Sunak of the UK visited the United States. He said, one thing that won't change is the strength of our partnership, our friendship, and we will put our values front and center as we have always done to deliver for the British and American people. President Biden, the US Senate, the US Congress have all called for the British to honor all facets of the Good Friday Agreement. The current British Legacy Justice Bill unilaterally changes the Good Friday Agreement and therefore is opposed by every major political party in the north of Ireland. Today, the Ancient Order of Hibernians in America call on Prime Minister Sunak to demonstrate the strength of our partnership, our friendship, and ask him to put our values front and center by stopping the Legacy Justice Bill immediately. This is something he could do immediately that would demonstrate his commitment to the special relationship with the United States of America. To learn more, we begin this emergency webinar about this outrageous Legacy Justice Bill. Leading us today on our discussion will be our National Freedom for Ireland Chairman, Martin Galvin. Martin?
Thank you, Danny. Danny, today we're going to begin the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill. Has been opposed, as you said, by all political parties in the North, Unionists and Nationalists. It's opposed clearly by the Irish government. It's opposed by members of Congress. It's opposed by victims because it will take away the basic rights that they have to truth and justice. And now in this past week, with the publishing of new amendments and just prior to that, the appointment of Declan Morgan as the chair of this commission, the British government is signaling their intention to go ahead. We will be hearing from one of the victims, Patsy Kelly, one of the families who've been fighting for justice. Well, next month, it'll be 50 years. We'll hear from Niall Murphy, one of the solicitors, to tell us about the legal implications which this bill has, why it is so strongly opposed, why it is seen as the end of the fight for truth and justice in terms of many of the things that should work. And then we're going to go to Andre Murphy. She is the Deputy Director of Relatives to Justice, who works with many campaigns and campaigners and can tell us the impact, how the feelings of these families feel about this particular bill. But we're going to start with a member of Congress. One of the things that the British government pays most attention to, if not the thing which the British government pays most attention to, is Opinion of America. One of the leading voices on Irish issues, particularly on this issue, has been Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, along with many others. And he was kind enough to join us today. Congressman, you have been an opponent of this bill for a long time. You've joined resolutions with Congressman Keating, with Congressman Boyle. You were on House Resolution 117. You have been opposing this bill since it was first proposed. And now, just within the last week, when it was announced that Declan Morgan was appointed as chairman, the former Chief Justice of Lord Justice for the North, you and Congressman Keating sent a very strong letter to the British Secretary opposing the bill, asking them to withdraw it. Could you tell us about the initiative that you and Congressman Keating came forward with last week?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Danny, and Patsy and Niall. Thank you for joining us as well. Just before we start, I am a longtime member of the AOH. Before I was even old enough to be a member of the AOH, I was running around Division I in Bristol, Pennsylvania, with my father, who is there is nothing more important to him personally, and God love him. He's 88 years old. He's still with us, than his membership to the Ancient Order of Hibernians. All of our extended family and friends are members. Largest, oldest Irish Catholic organization, of course, founded in PA and New York City in 1836. With regard to this issue, Martin, UK's Northern Ireland Troubles are referring to it, obviously, as a Legacy and Reconciliation Bill. Just for those of in the audience that need a brief synopsis of it, essentially it would create an independent commission for reconciliation and information recovery. Communities across Northern Ireland have expressed concern that this bill would deny justice to the victims of the Troubles on both sides, and further the cover-up of the truth of what happened during this time period, roughly between 1969 and 1998. The British are interested in providing, I believe, protections and amnesty for UK military armed forces members and veterans that served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. And even though this bill is still moving through the House of Lords, it is not yet law, the UK Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who we addressed that letter to, Martin, as you just referenced, recently announced the appointment of a chief commissioner to the ICRIR. We believe this step is inappropriate, to say the least. I'll refrain from further adjectives. It's an anticipatory step. It disregards the rights of the people of Northern Ireland to control their own destiny with regard to peace and reconciliation. So as referenced on May 15th, myself and my friend from Massachusetts, Bill Keating, it's a bipartisan letter coming from a Democrat and Republican. We're both in House leadership on the foreign affairs and intelligence side. So basically the entire spectrum of national security and foreign affairs on a bipartisan basis. Myself and Representative Keating represent the 21st anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which secured peace and a pathway of prosperity, is now being undercut by this. The GFA relies on three institutions to keep communication open in the interest of peace: the Northern Ireland Executive, the North-South Ministerial Council, and the British Irish Council. And the government in Northern Ireland is still not formed due to a protest by the DUP and now minority party representing predominantly Protestant British loyalists over post-Brexit trade issues in the region. So what we're planning on doing is myself and Representative Keating are going to use our networks within Congress. Myself specifically, I'm the co-chair of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. So that's the only bipartisan bloc in Congress. We are 64 members strong, 32 Democrats, 32 Republicans. I am going to be forwarding this issue to them. We are hopeful that we are going to issue a strong, large bipartisan statement to the British government that if you want to maintain strong ties to the United States, and as you all know, we have a number of areas where we have strong ties and allegiance and friendship, quite frankly, in a number of areas, including intelligence sharing, economic agreements, and the like. This would represent, if they are to proceed with this, would be a major step backwards. We are simply not going to sit back. Democrats or Republicans in Congress will not sit back and allow a whitewashing of history to occur. And that's what this is. Our countries, all of our countries, are supposed to stand for justice and the rule of law, and not only for the victims, but their family members as well. And this is not going to be swept under the carpet. It's not, they're not going to be able to cut any kind of agreement or deal with the United States to allow this to go forward in exchange for something else. The message we are delivering to them is that is off the table. It is not going to happen. We are not going to let this go away. This would create a major, if they were to proceed here, create a major impediment to our relationship with a longtime friend and ally. So I can't overstate that enough. Those of us, and there are a lot of us, by the way, in Congress with Irish roots. We hold them near and dear to our heart. It's baked into our genetic DNA. It's who we are as human beings. And this is a huge issue that all of us who have been connected to our Irish heritage grew up learning about and seeing, not just through our activity in the AOH, but through a number of other areas. And it is just not going to happen that many of us who are now serving in Congress, who are exposed to this for all those years, albeit from afar, are going to sit back and let this get swept under the carpet. It is not going to happen. And I say that as a leader of a bipartisan group in Congress, not just a representative of one party. And also the fact that me and Bill Keating, who are two of the leading voices on this issue and on foreign affairs in general, are both strongly committed to this, should tell everybody on this call they need to know. So with that, Martin, I yield back.
Congressman, I was going to ask you a follow-up, but I think you've covered everything. I just did Patsy Kelly, one of the victims,
Yep.
just wanted to say something to you before you go. We were great to make time for us today. I know you had to rearrange your schedule. Just ask Patsy Kelly, who's going to talk next, but he's one of the victims, just to tell you how important what you're doing, what you and other congressmen are doing are to the people in the north of Ireland, how closely they watch, how deeply they feel it. Patsy.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And yeah, just want to give, personally from our family's point of view, but for all families, really, Congressman Fitzpatrick, the level of work that you and your colleagues in Congress have put in Washington with regard to opposing the legacy bill is just so deeply appreciated. The legacy bill, from our perspective, it makes the lives of our loved ones who've been lost meaningless. It means that the families who are left to pick up the pieces are then viewed by the British government as being meaningless as well, and the communities upon which we come from. So really, I really want to extend our deep appreciation and thanks to yourself and to all of your colleagues across Congress for your work on this.
You bet, Patsy. Thank you.
Brian, I just have to comment when you talked about how important that bipartisan group is. And I know you had a chance to meet the First Minister-elect Michelle O'Neill this week.
Mhm.
And she also was able to meet with the leadership on the Democrat side of the aisle. But I found it interesting that that bipartisan committee is 32 Democratic and 32 Republican, and we're all, as part of the AOH, working for a 32 county United Ireland. So I just wanted to throw that in. It's off topic, but it hit me that I don't think there's any coincidences in life, and that might be an omen. So, and I want to echo before I yield back to Martin. Thank you, Brian, for your time. And I saw him in action this week, and you continue to amaze us, and you make your father and every member of the Ancient Order Hibernians proud every day. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Danny, and to Patsy and to everybody else. Please know, yes, we did send a letter. That letter was just the beginning of the conversation. We are not going to stop and end with a letter. I can promise you that. We are making it clear, unequivocally and unapologetically, that this will be a major step backwards in U.S.-UK relationships if they are to proceed on this path. We cannot state that strongly enough. And the key here is there are so many things going on in Congress and going on in all of our lives. We can't allow us to lose focus and put this on the back burner, because that's when things like this slide through. The effort's got to be vigilant. It's got to be bipartisan. It is bipartisan. We will be back in Congress next week. It is my hope that the AOH will continue to engage actively with my colleagues and myself over these next critical few weeks, so that we can nip this problem in the bud before it becomes a bigger problem. But we are very, very strongly convicted in our belief that this can't even proceed through one chamber. It sends entirely the wrong message, and we will take that as a sign of disrespect for every Irish American in Congress who holds our relationship with Ireland very, very near and dear to our hearts.
Thank you very much, Congressman Fitzpatrick. And again, I know your scheduler said you had to get off as early as possible. You've covered everything we could have possibly expected, and we appreciate it very much. And Patsy said it all for all the victims. Thank you.
God bless you, Patsy. Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to go to Patsy Kelly. Now, one of the things that we always do in these webinars is we begin with one representative of the victims. We could have picked up one of hundreds of different families to talk about what this legacy bill will mean to them, because those victims' families, more than anything else, really brings home how much of an injustice this is, how strongly this issue must be opposed. Now, a few weeks ago, we had an election. A number of councilors were elected. I believe for the first time, more nationalist and unionist councilors were elected. In 1974, when Patsy Kelly Sr. was a councilor, there were very few nationalist councilors. Most people were afraid to serve for reasons he's going to talk about. Patsy, welcome. And could you tell us what happened to your father, who was an independent councilor, elected councilor in the north of Ireland in July of 1974?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Yeah, so my father was elected in 1973 as an independent councillor who was part of the civil rights movement in Tyrone at the time. And really, his bearing in mind, this is 12 months later that Bloody Sunday occurred. So the environment was extremely charged within the North at the time. But his main motivations were, within the nationalist community were seeking equality on housing, on jobs, and so forth. And in general, his day-to-day motivation was to try to improve the lives of the people and the community that he lived within. So he began, as well as being an independent councillor, he was running a bar in the village of Trillick in Tyrone. And on the 24th of July, he locked up the bar to make the 2-mile journey home to the family home. And he was stopped at what we believe was a UDR checkpoint and was abducted and murdered. Let
me just stop you. The UDR, the Ulster Defence Regiment, was actually a regiment, a locally recruited regiment of the British Army. So it's actually part of the British Army, trained, paid, equipped by the British Army. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And so local people had seen this patrol in operation on the Bodoni Road, which is the location of the abduction scene. And it's important to state that just a week earlier, my father was also stopped at a checkpoint, a UDR checkpoint at the exact same location, which of course we now believe was a dummy run for the murder. So this wasn't a murder that just happened off the cuff. It required an extreme level of planning. Because when my father was abducted, it was a period of over 3 weeks before his body was recovered, which was in a lake in Fermanagh, over 15 miles away. Now, within that time period of the 3 weeks, there were the local community believed straight away that because he was an elected representative of the community, that he had been abducted and murdered by the UDR. Blood, buttons, and fragments of hair were found at the abduction scene. Within that 3-week period, my mother discovered that she was pregnant with myself. So they already had 4 children of Geraldine, Barry, Fergal, and Una. And within that time period of the trauma of thousands of people would have been out on a daily basis searching for my father, she discovered that she was expecting myself. But within that time period as well, police the RUC had told my mother that first of all, they stated, look, we believe that he's probably run off with another woman. And that was the first statement that they made. Secondly, they stated that, look, we believe that as soon as we find your husband's body, we are going to have enough evidence to arrange to get a conviction. So my father's body was found at a location called Loch Eyes in County Fermanagh, which just a few days previous to that, a search party had arrived at that location and were told by the police to leave the area because they had already dredged that lake. A few days later, the body turns up in the lake. It's found by local fishermen. He had been shot 6 times with 6 shots to the trunk of the body. He had deep lacerations inflicted on his scalp. He had burn markings to the forehand of his arm, and strong signs of strangulation in the sense that his voice box had actually been shattered. So lots of very, very specific injuries inflicted in what was a very, very brutal murder. Of course, the police claim that once they would find the body, that they had enough evidence to secure a conviction. Let's just state that almost, for almost 50 years later, we're still waiting for that promise to be fulfilled, which of course, the body was never meant to be found. The body was never meant to be found. And a cover-up had swung into action immediately after the abduction of my father.
Right. Now, your family's been fighting for justice since July of 1974 when this occurred. You've gone to the ombudsman, you've applied for an inquest. What are you trying to find out through those various agencies that were set up to give legacy justice?
Very simply, we're trying to establish the truth. We just want to know the truth. We believe that my father was abducted and murdered by servants of the British state, and that since 1974 has been covered up by servants of the state. And really, people will ask, well, why are you embarking on the campaign, and how have you continued? Well, what it ultimately is about, Martin, is about trying to get to a point of healing and resolution with the past. Now, how can you get to a point of healing and move on with your life if who are you supposed to forgive? Who actually, it needs to be laid out. And there's so many other families who are in exactly the same position as us, who very simply, from all backgrounds, from all community backgrounds, who just want the truth. And for those avenues to be shut down, I mean, as far as we've managed to get through the police ombudsman's office, bearing in mind, it was only just a number of weeks ago we received that report. That has taken over a period of 5 years for that to be actually from when they undertook the original investigation was 2018. So long periods of time. Within that time period as well, it's important to state that we were continually and have been continually seeking a fresh inquest into my father's murder, because in 1975, obviously, due to the cover-up, numerous evidential lead items weren't submitted to the original inquest. So an open verdict was delivered then. As we've been seeking a fresh inquest in parallel with the police ombudsman's office, we have always been told by the Attorney General that they can't act until the police ombudsman's inquiry has finished. That inquiry has now finished, and we immediately called on the Attorney General and contacted the Attorney General to grant a fresh inquest. That has been subsequently denied, and now we're at the state that at the point of, as you say, almost 50 years later, we're still battling the British state, where we now have to take a case of an application of judicial review to seek to get the Attorney General's decision overturned. So there's a whole litany of battles that families like ours have to fight on a daily basis, and it's important then for Congressman Fitzpatrick and the Congress in general to be giving their backing to the scrapping of the legacy bill, because the truth for us is what is paramount. The legacy bill will ensure that the truth is once and for all shut down to us and to so many other families.
All right, we're going to end just very quickly. You were able to get some measure of truth from an ombudsman report that explains some of the criticisms of the Royal Ulster Constabulary. You're trying for an inquest that would be put in a position where they all end. We're going to get a legal description of that. What would it mean to your family, other victims' families that you know of, if this legacy bill goes through?
It's already extremely traumatic to imagine that it could go through, and if it was to go through, it really states that the people who lost their lives in the conflict in the north are completely and utterly meaningless, that they don't have any value, and that the families who are left to pick up the pieces and to campaign for years are then deemed as having no value and being meaningless. And the community, and it's very important to state that as well, that the communities of where, particularly in our own case in Trillick and in Tyrone, there would be an extreme level of anger to think that families would be denied truth and justice from the British state.
Next, we're going to go to Niall Murphy. Niall is with the firm of Kevin R. Winters. He's one of the leading civil rights lawyers in the north of Ireland. He deals with these cases to get an explanation of what the bill would mean. Niall, in the past week, a number of amendments were put forward by British Lord Kane. The amendments were supposed to make the bill better. We're told that these amendments actually make the bill as bad as it was, and it's difficult to understand how the bill could get worse, that these amendments have actually accomplished that. What is your reaction as a solicitor who deals with these cases to the legacy bill and particularly the new amendments?
The new amendments are worse than ever could have been thought. I didn't think that the legislation could have got any worse, but the amendments which were published on Thursday night, I fear will have a perhaps terminal effect on the ability to seek the refuge and comfort of the court. Now, that is one of the most fundamental principles in any civilized society, but access to the court will be closed. So just think about that for a moment. A citizen who has rights, internationally enshrined rights under the European Convention of Human Rights, we'll talk about that in a moment, is being denied access to the court. The new legislation brings forward the date by which the courts will close, in effect, to the 1st of May 2024. And the state will forever safeguard its own secrets, will forever protect its role in the conflict, because the Secretary of State becomes the ultimate arbiter and not the court. So there's a very fundamental rule of law issue as to how our society deals with the past, and it's just terrifying as a legal practitioner that is the case.
All right, Niall, just let's go through. Patsy Kelly had talked about his family had pursued an ombudsman report. It took a number of years, but they were able to get some measure of truth, expose some truth before going on to an inquest. What happens to ombudsman's report under this new legislation?
Well, the ombudsman's office closes. There will be no more, and people need to understand that. Okay. Inquests close. They will stop. There will be no more inquests.
Well, inquest, there was legislation. It was supposed to say if an inquest progresses to a certain point, it would continue. And people were hopeful that if they had applied or been awarded an inquest, that would go to conclusion. What actually happens to inquests now under the new law? They
close. If the inquest is not concluded by way of verdict on the 1st of May 2024, it's over. And that was clause 40, which was laid before Parliament on Thursday night at about 8 p.m. Now, I want to talk just about the impact that has on real lives, on families. And I have the privilege to represent the family of Sean Brown, who was a GA official in South Derry, one of the most respected people in that community, who was murdered on the 12th of May, 1997. His family have never had an inquest. It wasn't a case that they had a perfunctory inquest that closed within a day. They just have never had an inquest. They did have an ombudsman's report in 2004, one of the first reports by Nuno Olone, but the fundamental right to an inquest has been denied to them ever since. And I just would like to take a moment to explain the significance of Sean Brown's inquest, not above any other inquest, but it has been parked pending for over 25 years. And Seamus Heaney, the Nobel laureate poet, whose poetry is oft quoted by President Biden, Seamus Heaney was a contemporary school friend and neighbour of Sean Brown, and I would like to read out a letter that he sent to the Irish News after Sean's passing, just to let people understand what this really means for our community. Sean Brown's murder was shocking and sinister. I've known 2 generations of the Brown family. They are people of great probity, much respected in the Balahi district, so my heart goes out to them at this moment. I heard the news in Olympia just after I had visited the stadium where the original Olympic Games were held, and given Sean Brown's role as chairman of the local GA club Balahi, I could not help thinking of his death as a crime against the ancient Olympic spirit. The Greeks recognised that there was something sacrosanct about the athletic ideal and regarded any violence during the period of the Games as sacrilegious. Athletics and drama, two of the great civilizing activities of Greece, were two of the activities which Sean Brown promoted in his capacity as a lifelong member of the local Wolf Tones club. He was a man of integrity and goodwill, qualities which were manifest when he presided at an event organised by the club in January last year to celebrate the award of the Nobel Prize to this particular Balahi man. Many things were precious about that evening, including Sean's presentation to me of a painting of Loch Beg and the country around it, where we both grew up. But even more important was the fact that the celebration was attended by the people from both sides of the Balahi community, Protestant and Catholic. Sean represented something better than we have grown used to, something not quite covered by the word reconciliation, because that word has become a policy word, official and public. This was more like a purification, a release from what the Greeks called the miasma, the stain of spilled blood. It is such a terrible irony that the man who organised such an event should die at the hands of a sectarian killer. And we know now that Sean's murder was carried out by state agents and was their detection was protected by the RUC. Evidence was destroyed, evidence was not collected. CCTV from a police station was destroyed. And the correct forum for that is court. Now, an inquest, nobody writes a check, nobody goes to jail. So what do the British government have to fear from a court and from a judge? What do they have to fear from the disclosure that is owed? Now, we're in court on Tuesday, okay? We had been in court some 7 weeks ago where Brady Brown, 83 years old, my heart broke watching her climb into the witness box and provide testimony as to her beloved husband. It took weeks to get her steeled and ready to attend court, a huge day to travel to Belfast, to walk into that High Court and give that testimony with such dignity and powerful weight. And it took her weeks to recover from it. Her heart was broken. The judge that day set down very strict guidelines about what he expected and set down 2 days of court this Monday and Tuesday, the 12th and 13th of June, where we expected to reconvene the inquest, hear evidence, compel witnesses and cross-examine them to receive sensitive disclosure. The sensitive disclosure is where the state secrets are buried. We haven't received that after 26 years. So the judge set down very methodical deadlines, what he wanted in terms of disclosure by Monday. On Wednesday, the day before Lord Kane laid his terminal death sentence on the ability to access justice, we received correspondence from the court to advise none of the deadlines have been met and we can't proceed on Monday and Tuesday. Now that is an obscenity and people don't understand the lack of respect that is being exhibited by the British government and its representatives in court. And on Tuesday, there will be very strong representations made by ourselves on behalf of the Brown family about what we expect. Inquests are convened. The most important person in the inquest is the next of kin, and the British representatives are thumbing their nose both to the court and to our families. And on the 1st of May 2024, they get what they've always been after. They get to close the book, walk away, and manage their own reputation.
Right, so Niall, there are a number of other inquests that are supposed to go forward that have never started. There are other inquests. I know a number of inquests were started in hopes that just if they got into court to begin with, they would be able to go to completion. What happens to all of those inquests now if the British decide just to stall until May of 2024?
It's closed. If that amendment is approved, which was laid before Parliament on Thursday night, it's over. If your case is not ready for a verdict on the 1st of May 2024, the case passes to the ICRIR.
All right. No, all you have to do
which is not judicially superintended.
Yeah.
And the ultimate arbiter is the British Secretary of State.
All right. The new law would also take away any right for criminal convictions, such as we recently had the conviction of the murder of Aidan McAnespie. It takes away rights to begin new civil actions. Your firm has talked about appealing to the Irish government to go directly to the European Court in an interstate case to try and overturn this on the basis of a violation of Article 2. What would it mean if the Irish government does not begin such a case? What would it mean for families like the Brown case, for example? What would they have to do, or the Kelly family, to go through the courts in the north of Ireland to get to the European Court to get this law overturned?
Well, representatives of the Crown Solicitor's Office have amazed me at their ingenuity to delay proceedings. I have a sneaking disregard, or a regard actually, for their ability to expand and extrapolate time and effectively to waste it. And Mark Thompson, our good friend and Director of Relatives for Justice, remarked many years ago that the state's policy in its first instance was to deny. Then it's delay, with the ambition that next of kin will die. And we're seeing it. And the delay in proceedings is a sight to behold.
Right.
Just to answer your question, any family, and there will be dozens of challenges to this legislation, but any family who takes such a challenge will be delayed in the High Court in Belfast at first instance. The application would be one of judicial review. That can't commence until the bill attains royal assent. The judicial review will be beset with delays for affidavits, skeleton arguments, submission of case law. The hearing will be heard. The judge will reserve his judgment. And by whatever side wins or loses, there will be an appeal to the Court of Appeal. And again, there will be exhaustive delay in convening that appeal because it's such a busy court, and then the appeal court writing a judgment. I have cases before the Court of Appeal for years.
Right. So what are we talking about?
I'm sorry, Martin. Then it has to go to the Supreme Court in London, who will prevaricate, hear the case, reserve judgment. And it is only when the Supreme Court has what is described in European law exhausted the domestic remedy that an applicant can actually take a case to Strasbourg, to the European Court of Human Rights, to have this bill struck down. I fear that process could take as long as 4 or 5 years, but the British government the Irish government have an ability to make an interstate application directly to Strasbourg, and could have the case considered by Strasbourg within 6 months. That's under Rule 46 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So we would appeal and have submitted a very detailed submission to the Attorney General in Dublin that the second that this offensive bill of shame attains royal assent, that the Irish government immediately commence interstate proceedings in Strasbourg.
All right. Lastly, Declan Morgan, the former Chief Justice for the North of Ireland, has just been appointed to head this commission. What's your reaction to that? Does it make any difference in terms of the families you represent?
Well, Declan Morgan took the issue of legacy very seriously. He was frustrated personally when he came up with what became known as the Lord Chief Justice's plan. He had a plan to hear all legacy inquests within 5 years. Had his plan been resourced appropriately by the Department of Justice, all inquests would have been heard and concluded by now. His plan was presented. He looked families in the eye, to be fair to him, and told them that he was going to discharge the state's obligations under Article 2. He convened a private but significant meeting at a hotel beside the High Court in Belfast, attended by hundreds of families, and I thought quite courageously told them that he would deal with the inquests. the plan required finance from the Ministry of Justice for courtrooms, court staff, judges themselves, and the Department of Justice, I think under an alliance minister, had made a submission for the money that was required to hold these inquests. Arlene Foster refused to allow that bid to be considered by the executive. That decision to refuse the bid to be considered was itself judicially reviewed and was held to be unlawful. So the Lord Chief Justice's plan was stymied by the DUP, a decision which itself was found to be unlawful, but it worked. It provided the prevarication to stop these cases from progressing, and now we're in the situation that we're in. I was surprised. I'll not put it further than that. That Sir Declan Morgan took the position, but there will be challenge to the legislation, and I think, bar the legislation being withdrawn, which I don't hold out much hope for, all energies will be into challenging the lawfulness of it.
Next, we're going to go to Andre Murphy. Andre is the director, deputy director of Relatives for Justice. Andre, you deal with Relatives for Justice, deals with a great many families. You deal with all of these different procedures, whether it's inquest, people involved with ombudsman report, people involved with civil cases, criminal cases. What is the reaction of families in the north of Ireland to this bill, the families that you work with?
Thanks, Martin. And can I begin by acknowledging this webinar and the role of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and to thank Congressman Fitzpatrick before I begin. It is of note and no coincidence that this is the first considered discussion about legacy since these amendments were brought to the legacy bill on Thursday evening on either side of the Atlantic, and that it is the Ancient Order of Hibernians hosting this is no coincidence, and also shows its value and is incredibly welcome. So from the bottom of my heart and our organization's heart, thank you so much. And can I also pay testimony to Patsy for an extraordinary piece that he's shared with us today in the context of such a difficult time. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that many members of the Ancient Order of Hibernians and the Ladies' Ancient Order were over in May and April to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Good Friday Agreement doesn't talk an awful lot about victims, but it is worth mentioning that it does say the following, that the participants, the signatories to the Good Friday Agreement, believe it is essential to acknowledge and address the suffering of victims of violence. It is recognised victims have a right to remember as well as contribute to a changed society. We put that beside the words of Patsy this afternoon, and we see that the law has been weaponised against families to render them, in his words, meaningless and of no value. That would echo the hundreds upon hundreds of families we work with. And I have to say, yesterday was an incredibly difficult day in our office as families were texting, emailing and phoning our offices saying, what does this mean for them? Just think about how many families are engaged with the Police Ombudsman's office. Just that one strand that is going to be closed down in May next year. Over 500 murders are registered with the Police Ombudsman right now. There are many families who have been working towards making ombudsman's applications. That's just 500 families who are today sitting going, what happens to us? 1,100 cases, civil cases sitting in the courts, 1,100 families who are told that this is going to close down. The inquests that are sitting, that should have been heard, as Niall has said, sitting in the inquest courts right now, they have no idea what's going to happen next. That is without all of the applications that are sitting with the Attorney General to have a new inquest open, including Patsy's family. You know, we are talking about scores upon scores, hundreds of families living in communities right across the north, and the indignity of having this put with the word reconciliation. You cannot put reconciliation and the weaponizing of law against those most harmed during our conflict together. You simply cannot do it. I think that it's really important for us to acknowledge, you know, Niall's testimony about the Brown family could be repeated, and I just want to draw attention to one of the webinars, well, actually two of the webinars that you held, Danny and Martin, with the families affected by the Spring Hill massacre and by the New Lodge. Both of those have inquests at different stages. So the New Lodge families, whose 50th anniversary was marked at the end of January, early February this year, had their inquest reopened. They are at no advanced stage within the inquest system. For them, this legacy bill was going to tear up their rights. But the Spring Hill families had somehow had their inquest opened to a point, and they thought, well, because we are in the system, we might be okay. These amendments, as Niall has said, closes that down. So you look at the contribution of Jacqueline Butler to the inquest when it was opened earlier this year, and some AOH members were able to go along to that. And she said, our family's life changed completely. Our world changed. Our childhoods were robbed. This inquest and getting to this point has been deeply traumatic. Now, that family went away from there because the British state refused to provide their witnesses, refused to provide their disclosure. They were meant to come back with the state providing their part of the inquest later this year. There is absolutely no incentive for the state to walk in there ready anymore. They can just wait it out until next May when it'll all be over. And Jacqueline, who shared her childhood as a very young child with the inquest court, has had that moment completely taken away from her. The AOH very kindly brought over Carmel Quinn from the Ballymurphy families a number of years ago. I asked her, as somebody who had been through a successful inquest, been through the entire process, at the very beginning, she also gave testimony to the inquest, a personal statement. And I asked her, if you had given that statement to that court and then didn't see the inquest out, how would you feel now? And this is how she responded to me. And I think it's really important to bear in mind that these are human beings, citizens who were meant to be beneficiaries of the Good Friday Agreement and also of everything that has followed since then. In a personal statement, you lay out all the feelings and hurt. For the first time, you are totally exposing your inner feelings that you kept to yourself. To then have no process with the British in the dock, I would have felt, what is it all for? And I think that sums up what this British legislation is doing. This British legislation is abusive. It is heaping trauma upon trauma, and it is undermining the Good Friday Agreement and its contribution to the core. And that it is the Ancient Order of Hibernians in Irish America and, you know, Congressman Fitzpatrick, thank God, that type of commitment that he gave to families, because where would we be without it? Because right now what we're seeing is every single party on this island, the Irish government, the sovereign government and co-signature to the Good Friday Agreement, has said this should absolutely not be happening, and it is being ignored in Westminster. There are more congressmen and congresspeople exercised about this legacy bill than there are MPs in Westminster. There is more scrutiny of this legislation happening in US Congress and Senate than it is in Westminster. And thank God for it. And hopefully webinars like this and your own work will continue so that we can have some sort of accountability for what is happening for all of these families I'm speaking about now.
All right, now what you're saying is basically, if this legislation goes through, if based on what Niall said, you're talking about going years through the British courts to exhaust your domestic remedies before you can begin in day one a case in the European court. So you're putting people like he mentioned, Sean Brown's wife, 83 years of age, make her 88, 89, 90, before she could get back to the position that she's in today. What would your appeal be to the Irish government on this issue?
Right now, we don't have time. We don't have time for any more failures. Victims and survivors have been failed since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. When it was signed, people were 25, 20, 15, 10 years since the killings of their loved ones. Now they are 50, 40, and 30. The women who were in their 40s and 50s as next of kin then are in their 80s and 90s. They are dying. We don't have time for any more failed mechanisms or for putting things to the test. We need the Irish government to step up on behalf of all of those families and to go to the interstate case immediately. Now, very welcoming, very, very welcome was Micheál Martin saying that they are considering it. And he said that 2 weeks ago. And we're hoping that that is absolutely the case and they're preparing for this because the British government are preparing. They have, you know, it's no coincidence that they put those amendments forward on Thursday night after Rishi Sunak had left Washington, because they knew the scrutiny would be on Rishi Sunak had he still been in Washington when these amendments were placed. We need the Irish government to be just as ready as the British government are right now, and the families will absolutely support them in doing that.
By the way, Boris Johnson has now resigned from Parliament. This originally was his bill, his initiative. It's not something that Rishi Sunak had put forward, and it's something that the British government could follow all of the appeals. All right, Danny, we're just going to go to you. Danny?
Thank you, Martin. I think what I'd like to do is give all our panelists an opportunity for one last comment and include Martin and Sean Pender. Is joined us. Our national vice president has been very key to our work in this, and give Sean a comment, and then I'll conclude with a brief statement. And we want to thank everyone from joining, both on YouTube and on Zoom. And of course, I want to recognize Chris Cook, who's our behind the scenes person, has really helped us out here. But let's go back to Patsy, and we'll go right around the horn. Patsy.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, just to finish up, really, you know, they from our family's point of view, and you know, all families really who are seeking truth and justice, it's the legacy bill is just it's entirely inhumane and callous in its nature, and really, you know, we believe that its primary purpose was, while it is to protect British troops from being convicted of any crimes they may have committed, it is also designed, and we're in no doubt that it has been designed to cause and inflict as much pain and as much hurt on families like mine and many, many others who have been impacted by the conflict in the north. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy. And before we go on to Niall, I want to comment that just after St. Patrick's Day, Martin Wall from the Irish Times did an article on how come Irish issues are always bipartisan in the United States. And he's right. And it's because the Irish community reflects the United States as a whole. And I think having Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick on today, a Republican leader who's right behind us, demonstrates, and it's something that I think the British government ought to take note that this isn't a Democratic issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's an American issue. And if you want to work with America and have a special relationship, you better wake up. Niall?
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you to the AOH and to the Congressman for taking this issue so seriously. You don't appreciate how much it means to us. Our fear is that the value of our representations does not resonate in the way that it should, that our community is ignored. This issue is the only issue that has, you know, talk about bipartisan consent. You know, it has the unity of purpose of all political parties here. No political party in this jurisdiction consents to this legislation, so it has but the voice of Irish America is listened to, and the weight of the signatories to that co-signed correspondence will resonate. So thank you for that. I also want to pay tribute to Patsy's testimony. It's just resonates with dignity, and the expression that he concluded with, that this legislation is designed to inflict pain, is just awful. And you know how families have that stoic persistence. Really, as a practitioner that has the privilege to represent some families, is so motivating. And you know, thank you, Patsy, for your dignity. My last remark would be that these amendments are the greatest ever existential threat to justice in Ireland. And how can peace in the absence of justice flourish? But finally, I would just like to conclude with a poem by Seamus Heaney. It's called the Augean Stables. And the definition of an Augean stable is a condition or place marked by the great accumulation of filth or corruption. My favourite bas relief, Athene showing Heracles were to broach the river brink, with the nod of her high helmet, her staff sunk in the exact spot, the Alpheus flowing. Out of its course into the deep dung strata of King Augeas's reeking yard and stables, sweet dissolutions from water tables, blocked doors and packed floors, deluging like gutters. And it was there in Olympia, down among the green willows, the lustral wash and run of river shallows, that we heard of Sean Brown's murder in the grounds of Blahy GA Club. And we imagined hose water smashing hard back off the asphalt in the car park where his athlete's blood ran cold.
Thank you, Niall. Andre?
Thank you. I think just to conclude, to remind us all that this is an exercise in impunity, where those who inflicted grave harms think that they can retain their narrative of what happened in our conflict after a Good Friday Agreement that said that there were no victors. It's also an exercise in broken promises to those most harmed. And it is an exercise in heaping trauma upon trauma on people already traumatized. And I want you to think about who picks up the pieces after that. And it will be all of us who are here and who care and who live in the communities most broken by our conflict. And it is a revisiting and a perpetuation of conflict. And that's something that perhaps isn't realized by those who think the preservation of their own narrative of the conflict is most important. And can I conclude by just thanking you all once again, because I know that you have our backs and you will continue to.
Well, we thank you as well. Your time, we know the cause is important, but you choose to give your time to us, and we appreciate all of you for that. Martin Galvin?
Danny, thank you. First of all, I want to acknowledge, I just received something from the National Committee of American Foreign Policy. They're a prestigious organization. They did a report on the North, and there's a section, the United States must implore the UK government to reverse its legacy and reconciliation bill. Last Tuesday, I was with the ad hoc committee for the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement in Washington. They have issued a position paper condemning this bill. The Irish American Unity Conference, Ladies AOH, Irish Northern Aid, Brehon Society puts out a notice on this. All of those organizations I know are listening. They participate in this and they are with us. America is their best hope of these victims. They've said that over and over again. We have people like Congressman Fitzpatrick. We got to continue to use that congressional influence to put the pressure on the British government. And if that fails, we have to use our combined and collective efforts to appeal to the Irish government. I know the Committee for the Good Implementation of the Good Friday Committee has been stalwart. They've appealed to the Irish government to bring an interstate case. We've got to join, raise our voices with them to try and push that. These families don't need 5 to 10 years exhausting their domestic remedies in British courts just to get to the European court and get back to where they are today.
Thank you, Martin. Sean Pender, National Vice President.
Thank you, Martin and Danny, on your leadership, having so many of these tremendous webinars to continue to educate our members and the broader Irish American community, and indeed those who seek justice. And Patsy, it's unfortunate that we've had to hear such a similar story, but again, our heart goes out to you, and we will stand with you as you get justice. We should not be surprised. There's an overwhelming common thread here that people stood up, they were killed, and then they were covered up their deaths, and it continues on. I think we should be rightfully proud of the work that we have done today. To hear a strong statement from Congressman Fitzpatrick, who leads a bipartisan group of 64 Congress meeting, to make sure that he said that this, if it continues to go through, will be a major impediment to the relations between the UK and the United States government, I think is very important. I think we should be proud that we have brought this issue to both sides of the aisle here. We ourselves have just this week helped introduce leaders of the North to high members of the Republican Party, and we actually brought members of the Good Friday Committee to meet Senator Schumer, the leader of the Senate, and they all speak with one voice that this can't continue. So the ball is now in the court again of the British. I don't expect them to do it right. They have never done anything right for 800 years. They're not going to start now. But we need the Irish government also then to step up, as was said, to immediately take this case, to bypass the wait. The people have waited long enough. To Niall and Andre, it's an honor to know you and call you friends. Continue your great work, and we look forward to continuing this fight for justice. Thank you all for all you've done.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you to all our panelists. Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick taking the time out of a very busy Saturday to be with us shows how important this issue is. Thank you to all our attendees between YouTube and Zoom. We've had over 100 people live at some point in this hour that we've been able to spend together. I'd remind Prime Minister Sunak and that one of the values shared not only between the British and the American people, but amongst all civilized nations, is that no one is above the law, and that justice is accessible to all, every one of us. The core value, this core value is the foundation not only of the Good Friday Agreement, our relationship with the United Kingdom, but of course, Magna Carta. Yet the UK has chosen a legacy bill that would create a protected class and give amnesty for murder. The United Kingdom has now committed numerous times in international treaty, starting with the landmark Good Friday Agreement, to providing justice to the families of the victims of the conflict in the north of Ireland. For half a century, more than half a century, they have stalled. Now they have the nerve to tell the world too much time has passed and it's time to turn a page. The UK legacy bill doesn't turn a page. It's an attempt to tear a page out of the UK's role in the North of Ireland, and it's unacceptable to everyone who believes in justice. The United States cannot condemn the atrocities currently being committed in Russia, on the Ukraine, or the civil rights abuses in China, while at the same time remain silent on similar abuses in Belfast. That silence is not indicative of a special relationship. It is a complicity of our accessory after the fact. And the United States is waking up. We're not going to sleep through this. The United States must remember the words of the late Dr. Martin Luther King: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we must speak out forcibly against the UK legacy bill. Chris, I'm not sure if we have a concluding video, but that ends our webinar today. Thank you all for your time. We ask you, this will be live on YouTube or be on YouTube in just a few moments. We ask you to take a minute and send that out to all your friends and share what we have. Thank you very much. God bless.
Danny, I want to thank the Irish Echo and the Irish Voice, who got a release very late in the week, covered it for us, and always do great coverage on all of our webinars.
They do. They do. Thank you, Martin. Thank you all.